bear false witness against thy neighbor. So we could rephrase this and say, could the real Ed please stand up? Because the word witness is the word Ed. And so we want to know, is this the real Ed? And so we don't want a false Ed. We want a true Ed in our presence. But that's what the idea here is that we ought not to bear false witness. So let's break down these words to really get an idea of what this commandment is really insisting upon. When you look at these words, you come across all the way to bear. What does bear mean? What am I bearing? Is this something that I'm bearing on my shoulders as a burden? What's the concept? The concept here is to look upon, have any involvement with, to engage in any kind of way. And so it could be just simply that I'm looking at something and I recognize, oh, wow, this is something that I see, I recognize, and I don't do something about, and I'm not going to stand up for what's right. I'm not going to stand up for what is legal or right or just. I am going to allow this to go on and not make a difference in the society. That's the idea right here. Bear just means I'm not going to interact with anything that's false, but that would also mean that if it is false, am I going to allow it to continue? Well, that's a big difference, right? Because so many times when we look at situations in our society, we can see things that seem questionable, things that we say, well, let's just turn away and just let that be. We're not going to say anything. But to allow something to float out there and to misrepresent is not allowable by this command. That means if somebody, let's say at work, somebody is falsely accused of something that happens in the workplace, and that it was your fault. It was your fault. I'm the one that forgot to lock the door, or whatever the case may be. And either no one is directly accused or someone else is, well, it was probably so-and-so. And you hear it and you don't say anything to correct it. What have you just done? You've looked upon a situation and you interacted with it and allowed the falsehood to remain. That's to allow to bear false witness. So you might say, well, I thought this was just something that I was the one lying or caught in the act. Yes, but we're dealing with a legality, a legal system that needs to be refined and honed so that it can be verified. Think about it today. There's a lot of interest in crime shows that have all this forensic capability. And now, many universities have these forensic sciences that you can have as your disciplinary study. So you can become a forensic scientist so that maybe you can get into criminology or whatever the case may be. And so you can walk into a crime scene and find, one strand of hair or any other kind of, source of DNA. And you're able to trace that all the way back to who done it and find these problems and solve them. There's not that forensic capability in this day and age. And so while today we may say, well, the criminal, the perpetrator is still going to be tracked down because there's not really a way to go into a situation and not leave any sign whatsoever. Now, there's still going to be guys that are going to do that as best as they possibly can. But we may feel like we can skate around the system. What you have to realize is the only reason we need forensics is because we cannot maintain the ninth commandment. That's the only reason. Because we've allowed injustice in speech and in a testimony to become so corrupted that we're at a point where we have to have all of these intricate ways of working the system so that we're able to nab who needs to be nabbed. And it all falls back down to a lot of these commandments have all come back down to, what are we teaching in our homes? What are we teaching in our homes? Are we teaching that we need to be very, very honest? Very honest. You say, well, does that mean I have to dish out everything that's going on? Well, that's up to you. That's probably dependent on the situation, and I can't account for every possible situation that goes on in your home or that you've experienced or whatever the case is. But if your child shades things in such a way that makes them look better, what have they just done? They've borne false witness to a degree. We begin to contour things so that it helps shield us against things that we are afraid we're going to have to face, the punishment we're going to have to face. And what there just needs to be is this appreciation for transparency. It leads to a point where the fear of transparency doesn't just inhibit the relationship between parent and child or between one child and the other. That failure of transparency will lead to a breakdown in their relationship with God. Because here I am as a parent who does not know everything that's going on in my children's lives. I do not understand all that's on their heart or in their mind, but God does. And they ought to be willing to be as transparent as they possibly can be to me, who loves them and wants their best and wants God's blessing upon their life, so that in the future, the one who does see all will be able to have, they'll be able to have a sweet relationship with him. And so that's one of the things that while we're sitting in the car, when the kids get to a point where they're about 12 years old, right around that time frame, we're sitting in the car and I'll say something along the lines of, "Hey, I just want you to know, we'll be talking about this or that," and I lead into it. There is going to be an attack against you, and that attack is going to be that there's no way you can tell me or mom what's going on in your heart or what's going on in your life. And that's going to be the attack from the enemy who wants to build a wall between you and me so that you can live in isolation. Things that live in isolation, that don't have the opportunity for the light of truth to hit and to impact, always become more corrupted. And I want you to know, you can tell me anything. You can tell me anything. And whatever's going on, I promise you, I'll listen. I'll work with you. I'll love you. Does not change my love for you. And I'll go through and talk about all of those things. Why? Because our society is programmed to cause children going into adolescence to figure that their parents don't understand them. How many sitcoms have been produced over the generations that present this kind of falsehood that parents just don't understand their children, especially the ones going into teenage years? The problem really is that parents understand they're weird. They are teenagers, and the more they get to be teenagers, there are points where you're just like, this is strange. This is really strange. But that's okay. As long as the strangeness is not a violation of Scripture, we can tolerate that. We can work with that. We can walk with that because they're figuring things out. They're growing into adults that are going to be able to function in this society independently. And so there are things that kids do that are just weird. But the society wants to build this wedge that says you can't be understood. And it's a lie straight from the pit of hell. It's the enemy bearing false witness, wanting to build a wall that starts to break down civilization. So to bear means I'm not going to have anything to do with that. And so in your own relationships, if you want a society that's going to be so much more healthy and blessed, then you've got to be transparent. You got to be transparent. You've got to not want to be entangled with anything that would be equal to this word bear. Well, what does false mean? The word false, if you were to look at it, is related to the root that's often used for an unreliable source of water, a spring that's unreliable. Now, in this area, y'all have had different experiences where you build homes and you have to depend on wells, and if you have a spring, maybe that's a great thing or whatever. And what an unreliable spring would be that under certain conditions, it's not going to produce water anymore. Well, what does this false really picture? What this false idea and the word pictures is under certain circumstances, I'm going to lock up. I'm not going to be bearing the truth. I'm not going to be issuing out the truth that should be issuing from me because I'm afraid of the conditions. That's the concept here. And what we have to understand is if I have done something that deserves punishment, I need to just bear it. I just need to deal with it. need to come forward, need to come clean, need to deal with that. Hey, you know what? Husbands and wives, there may be some things that you need to deal with one with the other. And you say, well, no, 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 you don't understand. No, I do understand. How can you ever have blessing in your relationship if you consistently dwell with, bear with this falseness? This falseness is the enemy's attack and strategy to begin a wall that will separate you from your spouse. This ninth commandment is crucial to the open lines of communication that have to exist. There has to be a ground of trust that exists in order for relationships to be stable and strong. Bear false witness is the word that I already mentioned. Witness is ed. That's why in Samuel you'll see that they raised the altar and they called the altar ed, because it was a witness of God's goodness. But then you see the last part of this commandment, against thy neighbor. Now, is this a limitation that says you can bear false witness to anyone who's not your neighbor? What does neighbor mean? Neighbor is related to a word that we've seen, I think, twice already in the Psalms, my darling, something very precious to me, a close companion, a friend, someone that you have already entrusted your heart and your desires and your thoughts and aspirations to. Don't you dare bear false witness against them. And what you're saying is that if you've already entrusted all of that, why would you even think about holding out anything against that person? But this is not just a limitation where you can say, well, I can lie to anybody else as long as they're not my darling, as long as they're not my neighbor. I can lie to everybody else and that's okay. No, the idea is there is no grounds for bearing false witness. Now, does that mean I need to be transparent to everyone about everything? No. If you've sinned against somebody, you need to deal with that person. If you have sinned, you bring your offering to the altar, and you remember you have aught against your brother. Go and take care of that with your brother first, and then come and finish presenting the offering that you have for God. That's something that's directed to whoever that may be. But when we're dealing with the realm of, or any boundaries that have anything to do with bearing false witness, what this commandment relays is there's not any boundary that allows me to permit an untruth or a false representation to exist. Let's look at the amplification, if you will, Deuteronomy 24. Deuteronomy 24, we'll look at a few other passages this evening. We'll be able to take our time through this part of the amplification, just because there's not as much scripture to look at. And so I feel so much more relaxed tonight. I don't have as much ground to cover. I'm not trying to race through all these different passages, okay? Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse number 8 is where we'll begin. Take heed in the plague of leprosy that thou observe diligently, and do according to all that the priests, the Levites, shall teach you. As I commanded them, so ye shall observe to do. Remember what the Lord thy God did unto Miriam by the way, after that ye were come forth out of Egypt. Now, this obviously, as many of the times we've come to these passages in Deuteronomy, becomes peculiar. How does this interact with the ninth commandment? Thou shalt not bear false witness. Well, there's several different ways to look at this. One is that if you were to contract leprosy, you can go back to the commandments in Leviticus and see the process that was outlined from God's word as to what they needed to do in order to hopefully be purified from the sickness of leprosy. And if you look through it, it's quite an involved process. There is a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of back and forth from the priest, and you got to be quarantined for so many days. Come back and let's see. And then if it's not quite this way it was, then maybe you're healing from it. And so let's go back and back and forth. And if you're healed from it, then boy, you take this offering of a dove and you break its neck, and you have the water and the blood mixing together, and it's supposed to be that the other one is set free and you've been redeemed. And wow, what a wonderful thing that is. But if it's not that way, then what happens? You're quarantined from society. You're removed from society with this sickness of leprosy. Can you think of anything else in Scripture that would be more prone to bearing false witness about than leprosy? Something that could potentially ostracize me from society, that I would want to be nervous about coming clean and saying, this is what's going on. With sicknesses, there's a whole gamut of how we respond with sicknesses. There's the extreme where Jack has sniffles, and so we're all staying home because we are thoughtful about everyone else, and we don't want anyone else to be sick. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's what needs to be done. Then there's the other side of things where, who cares? We're just going to be here, and we're going to be, and it's our mission in life is to strengthen the immunity of everyone around us, and that's our operation. Our operation is strong immunities, and that's the way we operate. I'm not here giving direction on what should happen. Use common sense and be wise. But what it does come down to, if you had a sickness where you felt it could ripple throughout the entire society and become a plague, oh boy, now we're talking about something that's really significant. And it really comes down to something that I would be inclined to want to cover, to want to hold back on. But there's this little note that's at the end of this. Remember what the Lord thy God did unto Miriam by the way. After that ye were come forth out of Egypt. Now, there's a lot of interesting mystery around that statement. He's saying, memorialize this. Remember. Well, what are we supposed to remember? Let's go to Numbers 12 and see. Numbers 12, and just look at this part of the story and see what goes on in this part of the story. I think there's a few things for us to remember about Miriam in Numbers 12. Children of Israel are turned back from the promised land. There's a lot that's going on in this part of the passage. There's defeat and disappointment and all that builds up in chapter 12. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. And they said, hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? And hath he not spoken also by us? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. What's interesting is that word meek is connected to a word that just means he was poor, kind of like poor in spirit, almost just like what you read in the Beatitudes. Poor in spirit. In other words, Moses was not going to stand up and try to vindicate himself before others. He was going to allow God to do that. Moses had full right to do that, but because of what God called Moses to do. But Moses, I think, learned a lesson early on in life because of a negative decision that he made when he saw a taskmaster beating on one of the Jewish people. He looked this way, that, killed the taskmaster, buried him in the sand, and ran away. But then all of a sudden, people knew about it. It's hard to keep something like that quiet. And so Moses learned, if I take matters into my own hands, it can be a devastating thing. Moses isn't going to take this into his own hands, and it's his own sister. His own sister's causing problems. His own sister is raising a word of accusation against him. What is Moses going to do? Well, God's going to take care of it for Moses. In verse 4, and the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses and unto Aaron and unto Miriam, come out ye three unto the tabernacle of the congregation. And they three came out. My mind and imagination just kind of chuckles through all this. It's almost like you go to your room, and all three of you are I can just see like Miriam, Aaron, Moses, oldest to youngest, all standing there in the line, all with their head down, just like you'd expect all your kids if you called them in. All you kids, come in here. We got something to talk about. And they're lined up right before the Lord. And the Lord's going to start to talk to these these siblings. Verse number 5. And the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth. And he said, Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all mine house. With him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark speeches. And the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Wherefore then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said unto Moses, Alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not this sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly, and wherein we have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh is half consumed, when he cometh out of the mother's womb. And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, Heal her now, O God, I beseech thee. And the Lord said unto Moses, If her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? Let her be shut out from the camp 7 days, and after that let her be received in again. And Miriam was shut out from the camp 7 days, and the people journeyed not till Miriam was brought in again. And afterwards the people removed from Hazeroth and pitched in the wilderness of Paran. Well, what a segment of the story of the children of Israel journeying through the wilderness. What are we supposed to remember about Miriam? Why does Numbers 24, right after talking about leprosy, land on, remember what the Lord did to Miriam in the wilderness? I think there's a lot of material in Numbers chapter 12. I think you have things where you can recognize, well, Miriam bore false witness against Moses. She said things, misrepresented facts that were an assault on his position in leadership that God had called him to demonstrate in the nation of Israel. The way that she went about it seems like there's something about Moses' wife. I don't know. We don't have enough material here to know exactly what that was, but there was something to do with Moses' wife that brought about the opportunity to bear this kind of witness. And because of that, what does the Lord do? He strikes Miriam with leprosy. Now, Aaron is somehow cooperating with this, but it really, based on what we see, the punishment and how it all works out, it seems like this has been Miriam's thing. Miriam, boy, if I hadn't watched you in the bulrushes, Moses, you wouldn't even be here. You've got a lot to thank me for because of who I am. And why does God only speak by you, Moses? Doesn't he speak by me? Think of all the wonderful things I've done. And she misrepresents these things, and God strikes her with leprosy. What is this supposed to represent? I believe what you see is that the moment that false witness is present in a relationship, it's like leprosy has taken roots in that person's heart. And the process of leprosy comes to a point where there's no social interaction. When it finally grows to a point where you cannot hide it, it's impossible to heal, seemingly. It seems like it's impossible to recover from. And all you have in that relationship is shouting, unclean, unclean. You have to stay away because I don't know how to trust or how to take that or how to interact with that person in that relationship. Lying, bearing false witness, is equated in Numbers 12 with the striking of leprosy against Miriam. And you say, really, is bearing false witness, misrepresenting details, that serious? One of the things that you probably have experienced is that when someone bears false witness or they just misrepresent something, how quickly or how easily are they able to regain that trust? It's not easy. It's not easy. What you may have forgiven the person. I'm not talking about holding a grudge or bitterness, but every time that person opens their mouth for at least a good while after, you're mentally fact-checking. Why? Because I need to verify that that's true, that's reliable, that is something stable for this relationship to continue. It can be that I can't trust that they'll be fine on their own in that circumstance because they've not been fine on their own in that circumstance. Well, the person that has borne that false witness can be really irritated. Why won't they trust me? What's wrong with them? It's not about what's wrong with them. Trust is something that takes time to earn, but can be destroyed in just one word. You say, really? One word? Yeah, one word. Way early on in my time here, I was talking with different folks, catching up with different things, and I asked someone how their knee surgery recovery was going. And the person looked at me, said, knee surgery? I said, yeah. And they still looked at me really weird, and they said, I didn't have knee surgery. Well, that's odd. Because somebody I know told me you had knee surgery. Well, I just left it because I'm not going to press the issue. It's like now we're really awkward, so what are we going to talk about now? And come to find out, the person that had told me that came back around and said, I, I, I didn't tell you what actually happened. And they had to come back and tell me what actually happened. And they were embarrassed by the whole ordeal. And it really came to a point where, do I consistently label that person as liar and deceiver? No, I don't do that in some kind of animosity or hatred against anyone. But all of a sudden now I have to do a double take if that person's going to tell me something. I don't interact with that person regularly, so it's not something that is something that is a detriment to my function in life. But if that person were to tell me anything, I would just have to say, is that real? Are you sure? Is that true? Why? Because something as silly as what surgery someone had was something that they didn't represent factually accurately. You say that something like that, what does it take for you to believe that somebody might not be trustworthy? And so that's what we're dealing with here. It becomes a leprosy that becomes labeled and stuck to you. And it takes time for it to heal. And the camp of Israel didn't move for 7 days. Everything was locked down. Everything was in a place where everyone knows something's wrong with Miriam. Why aren't we moving? Why isn't the cloud moving? Well, because Miriam. What happened to Miriam? She has leprosy. Why did she get leprosy? Because she said something against Moses. Oh, don't say anything against Moses. And so everything in the function of that society came to a screeching halt because of bearing false witness. You want to see something throw the emergency brake on in any relationship you're in, bear false witness. It'll do it. It is the destroyer of relationships. Back to Deuteronomy 24. We'll move quickly through some more of this amplification. Verse 10, Deuteronomy 24, verse 10. When thou dost lend thy brother anything, thou shalt not go into his house to fetch his pledge. Thou shalt stand abroad, and the man to whom thou dost lend shall bring out the pledge abroad unto thee. And if the man be poor, thou shalt not sleep with his pledge. In any case, thou shalt deliver him the pledge again when the sun goeth down, that he may sleep in his own raiment and bless thee, and it shall be righteousness unto thee before the Lord thy God. Here you have. Are you going to be a person of your word? So things are kind of being switched to where you are a person that's poor, that's in need. You have a need that needs to be addressed immediately. And so because of that, you have needed to take a loan from someone that could help you in your time of need. And in that situation, you, the one who has borrowed, ought to be a person of your word so that the lender doesn't feel that they need to go above and beyond just the ordinary ways of taking a commitment or a pledge. And they don't feel like they've got to gouge you to make sure that they are going to get back what they've put into this. So you look at the situation here. You lend to someone something. Don't go into their house to fetch this pledge. You say, what's that all about? Well, it's saying that let people have their space. If that person says that they're going to give you something that's going to commit, I will pay you back, then let them make those terms. How does that work in a society? That only works when there's honesty, when there's not bearing false witness. In other words, if I'm in such a desperate situation and I'm just borrowing something to help me out of this situation, then that borrower should be able to go into their home and look around and say, what's something that has some meaningful value to me that would communicate to this lender that I am a person of my word and I will repay this. And so that person who's borrowing scans the house and says, this is something that's very valuable, and walks out to the lender and says, here's what I'm willing to put to you as my pledge. This is something that's been a family heirloom. It's very valuable to me. I don't want to lose this. And so I want you to understand that this is something that has a draw upon my heart. I will repay what I've borrowed from you. I will be a person of my word. The lender shouldn't have to barge into the house and start taking stuff and saying, I'm going to take that and that and that and that because I'm going to make sure to hold you to your word. That's not a way a healthy society will work. And the same is true in the way that you interact with people in borrowing and loaning things and all of that. It should be so trustworthy that you are known as someone that returns things in a way that's maybe even improved from the way you got it. Oh man, I tried to wash it up, or I tried to put some gas back into it, or I fill up the tank, or whatever. That was one of the things that was just, I don't know if my dad told me I should do this or what, but one of the things I just remember from ever borrowing a vehicle, you try to fill up the gas. And what I found is what I did when I would fill up the gas tank, especially as pastor, I'd give back. And the next time I had to borrow the vehicle, the person would look at me saying, don't you fill up the gas tank? What am I supposed to do now? I'm supposed to violate my conscience and not fill up the gas tank? I don't know. So I try to work somewhere in the middle and try to be reasonable and to be a good borrower. Because it should be something that people say, he will take care of my stuff just as well as he takes care of his stuff. And you look down on the list, it could get so out of hand that if the society is corrupt, that the lender could take the coat of that borrower. And what's that like? That's like condemning someone to sleep out in the cold without a sleeping bag. When I mentioned this morning driving truck and bus, and most of the time driving bus, you got paid a certain amount, and if you got a hotel, that was out of your pay. Now, what seemed unreasonable is that they would tell you you shouldn't sleep on the vehicle, but we're also not going to pay you a workable wage that allows you to get a hotel. I mean, unless you're going to get a hostel or something like that. And they had all the list of hostels in there. Have any of you ever stayed in a hostel before? Okay. Yeah. A little weird. Okay. So I just have to say, in most cases, I'm not going to be doing that. I guess that's a thing in Europe. I think that's a thing in a lot of other countries to stay in the hostels. And I'm not doing that in another country either. Forget that. It's just kind of like a community room of beds. You find your bed and you sleep in it. Who knows who else is in the room with you? I've been in the same hotel room with people I know that I don't want to be in the room again with them. One of our missions trips, I was on the floor and we were getting ready to fly out the next morning, and so I'm sleeping on the floor in the hotel room. I'm not going to say who was in the room, but while I'm laying there, I'm saying, why am I having such trouble falling asleep? I can tell you why I'm having such trouble falling asleep. I recorded why I was having such trouble falling asleep. There was a cacophony of all of these people snoring in the room. And it was like, I don't usually have any trouble falling asleep, but that night I could not sleep. It was a rough trip getting out of the airport. It was really bad. And so, why would I want to do that? Okay. So what you're dealing with is you're robbing this person of their sleeping bag, basically. And you're condemning them to sleeping out in the cold, and they'll have to suffer through it. And that's not humane. That's not treating people the way the society should be treated. So this is supposed to work both sides. Lender should trust the borrower. Borrower should be a person of their word, so the lender can trust the borrower. And if all this works out, then nothing should be a problem. Going on, verse 14, thou shalt not oppress an hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or of thy strangers that are in thy land within thy gates. At his day thou shalt give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and setteth his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee. Thy father shall not be the father shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. Two different principles here, verses 14 through 15. What's interesting is a few months ago, we were standing in Wendy's in Lock Haven, Mill Hall. And we're standing there, and I'm waiting for my food, and I see on the hiring now advertisement there, they advertised daily wages, and I thought, what in the world, have any of you heard of daily wages? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I thought, this is new. I've never heard. I've heard of weekly wages. And when I first came here, it was weekly, and just because of the process of writing checks and all that, we've changed it to where it's biweekly. But daily wages, I thought, well, what's that about? Now I understand that there's a lot of implications with that. There's a lot of factors. Sometimes it's a matter of those individuals have pressing needs, and they go home and they need to be able to supply the needs of their family. In a lot of cultures, that's the way it is. When I was on a mission trip to Madagascar, I got to the airport and Dan Brown couldn't come into the airport to help me get my stuff and get out the door. And I told the story a long time ago. I'm getting my luggage, and there's a lot of helpful people in foreign countries, just very kind people. They see me and they just want to help me in so many ways. I must just have such a welcoming face. And so someone from Malagasy person is running up to me. Oh, please, please, can I help you with your luggage? No, I got it. Thanks. I don't have much. And he asked me persistently over and over and over. And so finally, I'm just fed up with the person asking. I've tried to push him away. I've tried to be kind, tried to be nice. Nothing's working. I don't want to like lose my testimony right here, first day in Madagascar. So I say, okay, my ride's right out here. Take my luggage. So he takes my luggage. I give him what I thought was just a small bill, nothing much. I had already changed some of my money into Malagasy. And so I gave him what I thought was nothing. And I walked out. He got my luggage to Dan Brown. Dan Brown got me in the vehicle, and away we went. And Dan Brown looked at me. He says, "So what'd you give him?" I told him what I gave him. And he said, "Oh, boy, they're eating chicken tonight." And I thought, well, that's funny. What does that mean? He said, "You just gave them a week's worth of wages all in one moment of taking your suitcase from the front door of the airport to the vehicle that was like, as far as the parking lot is from here out to there. Like, that's it. And he got a week's worth of wages. He's probably not going back to work all week long because he's saying, this is great. And all of a sudden I thought, wow, what was that all about? I didn't know. I didn't know any better. Well, what you're dealing with is a lot of cultures, they are subsistent. They are depending on the salary, what they earn that day in order to survive. And the rule is, if you have hired them and you've pledged to give them a salary, then you better give them that salary. Doesn't that bring parable of Jesus to mind, where the landowner has hired for a certain wage for the day and goes out and brings in the laborers, and he goes out 2 hours later, brings more laborers in, brings laborers throughout the day back to work on the land, and at the end of the day, he pays every single one of them the day wage. And the ones that had worked all day thought, if the ones who've only worked a couple of hours get the full day's wage, I wonder what we're going to get. And when they finally get their wage, they get a full day's wage, and they're mad. And the landlord looks at, didn't I agree with you? That's the principle that Jesus is bringing out from the law right here. Didn't I agree with you that that's what I would pay you? Isn't that what you were paid? So what's the problem? You were assuming something. What you were assuming is a false witness of the fact. The fact was, you agreed to these terms. They're fair wages, and I've paid you those fair wages. If it's mine to be dealt with, and I want to be an extraordinarily generous person, then let that be my decision. Leave it into God's hands is what Jesus' parables is really communicating. Well, we have a lot of things that we could go to. You could go to 1 Kings 21. 1 Kings 21, Naboth has a vineyard that's near the place where Ahab is, and Ahab wants it. And he goes to Naboth, says, "Can I have your vineyard?" Naboth says, "No way. This is my portion of blessing here in the promised land. I'm not going to give you this vineyard." And Ahab throws himself on the bed back at home, and he has a pity party. And Jezebel says, "I'm going to take care of it for you, dear old Ahab. I'll work the situation out." She writes letters to the town, has false witnesses rise up against Naboth, and there's supposed to be the celebration that's going to celebrate Naboth, and Naboth's the center figure of this celebration. But as everyone's celebrating, these false witnesses bring up an accusation against Naboth that says that he defied God and he used God's name in vain, and makes all these statements against Naboth. And then they drag Naboth out immediately and they stone him to death. And then Jezebel walks in, tells Ahab, "By the way, that vineyard, it's yours." And we look at that and we say, that's vicious. That's cruel. That's uncalled for. Yep. And anytime we bear false witness, you're no better than Jezebel. How's that for motivation? We don't want to be like Jezebel. But when we bear false witness, that's exactly the pattern we follow. Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. Let's look at a few New Testament application, and then we'll be done tonight. Matthew 5, verse 37. Specifically in this part of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is dealing with oaths. Now, oaths are an important thing in the Old Testament law. They have a lot to do with bearing false witness. Whatever proceeds from your lips, you must do. You see a lot of detail on the oaths at the end of, I think it's the book of Numbers or Leviticus. You see a lot having to do with the oaths. And so there's a lot of legal red tape that goes along with these. And when you read through them, you realize that there was this, I guess, desire to say, what I'm saying is really, really, really true. And Jesus' instruction here in the Sermon on the Mount is, why do you have the need to say, this is really, really, really true? I still remember in high school, we would have, I can't remember what the word was. What was the word? We would be in conversation, and we would, in order to back up our story, we would say, not no lie, but there was something else we would say. And for real? Yeah, for real. Maybe it's for real. And something like that, for real. No, are you telling the truth? For real. Like that really meant yes, I am honest. And it shouldn't be that way. Jesus says in verse 37, let your communications be yea, yea, nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. Whatever you say that cannot be taken at face value proceeds from evil. I had a serious situation in high school. I did not get in trouble very often, but there was one time when I really did get in big trouble. And looking back, I believe I was not intending to do anything wrong, but I understand the perception. We were goofing off in the morning before the bell for the morning class. I believe I'm 10th grade at this time. And goofing off, we were running out to the locker, getting something, and running back in. I think it was something as silly as who could run out to the locker, come back in fastest, or something stupid like that. We're bored, and there's no teacher around. Crazy things are going to happen. And so in the midst of this competition, or whatever we were doing, I and another guy, his name is Matt Ferguson, somehow we got tangled up in this competition. And I know I'm so petite and slender, you probably cannot even imagine how this happened, but I accidentally threw him into the door in this competition. And the way I threw him into the door, the handle just went right through the wall that was behind the door. And Matt was just a string bean, not much bigger than Luke. And so, I just knocked the senses out of this guy and destroyed the back wall of this room. My teacher is the principal of the school. He comes in, and we're all really scared to death. Oh no, what do we do? We're sitting there, and everything's quiet. And he walks in, and I'm sure the wheels are turning. He's looking around at our class, and we're all super quiet. The bell had just rung, so he has procedure. He's coming in, bell's rung, and so I think he's trying to figure things out. And I'm thinking, bell's rung, he's going to start things, and then we'll deal with it. And he's getting ready to go through the procedure, and before he prays, he happens to just look down, look back, and he sees the gash in the wall. I mean, it's not hard to see. And so he turns back around, and he says, "Who did that?" Right away, I'm like, "Me. I did it. It was me. I did it. I'm sorry." And so went through a whole thing of, I was in big trouble. And it came down to the principal felt, and he and I are great terms. We're great friends. He'll call me from time to time or send me an email. He doesn't even remember this situation. He felt I was not willing to fess up for it. that I was wanting to cover up the situation and not admit it. It got dragged into, there was student council that was involved. They did interviews of everyone in the class to verify the story. I mean, this thing went like crazy. And I'm thinking, holy cow, I didn't mean to do this. And I wasn't trying to cover it up. I don't really believe I was trying to cover it up. But I could see how I didn't address it right away and didn't say it first thing that when he came into the room, this is what's going on. But what happened? False witness. You may say, well, that's not your fault. Doesn't matter. Communication is not what is seen or heard or what's said. Communication is what the person hears. Communication is what the other person receives on the other end of the signal. And so what it comes down to, whether or not I intended it, that's what he perceived. You can argue all day long, but what it comes down to, it was not unjustifiable. I didn't meet him at the door. I didn't address it right away. I gave pause. And that pause was enough for false witness. Well, the reason we're such on good terms, I believe I've earned back that trust. And it was soon after, because later on in high school, I was high school president or whatever, and other things, and he entrusted many other things to me. But what it came down to was my speech accurately representing what was going on? Ephesians 4 tells us what that transformation can be. When you look at Ephesians 4:32, you see the extremes of what the grace of God should accomplish. Ephesians 4 is an amazing passage that tells us that we ought to put off concerning the former conversation, the old man, which is corrupt according to the deceitful lust. Be renewed in the spirit of your mind, that you put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. Well, what does that look like, Paul? Well, you look down. As you look down through the list, I said 37, not 37. Verse 29. Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. Each of these areas that are mentioned at the end of Ephesians chapter 4 are not simply you are given the new creature status with your faith in Christ so that you stop doing bad things. Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth. No, that's not what defines someone with the new man, the new robe of righteousness that you're wearing. If you're going to live consistent with the nature of God that you bear as a believer, then guess what? It's not just that I no longer speak bad things. It's actually not just that I say some good things. It's that my speech is so refreshing. People come to the oasis of my presence and they are blessed by my words. You know, there are some people who are given to this very easily. There are some people that the moment something good happens, they run up to that individual and just say, oh, what a blessing. That was so wonderful. I just love this. And, oh, this is just wonderful. And right now, you probably have the name or the face of the person that acts like that, or a few people. Aren't they so refreshing? When they come running up to you, do you start grimacing and backing up and thinking, where can I escape to? No, that's usually not what's happening. Right then, you're like, oh, here they come. Wonder what nice thing they're going to say about me today. That's not really what you're thinking, but you're realizing that I can enjoy hearing from this person. What does that mean? That's gracious speech, ministering grace to the hearers. It's not sufficient to say, I'm no longer going to bear false witness, so I'm going to represent truth. Does this make me look fat? I'm going to not bear false witness and tell you. That's not what we're about. Ephesians 4:29 tells us we bear grace to the hearer. And so the way you communicate truth is communicated in such a way that somebody is completely refreshed by how you say things. I wasn't planning on it. Happened just this morning. Somebody was talking about how they get motion sickness. And so I said, well, you know what I've heard, because my dad gets motion sickness really bad. he liked to play tennis or whatever. And from talking to him and him playing tennis and being motion sickness, what I understood from his experience is that you get motion sickness because you focus on something that most other people don't focus on. And because that's what your brain naturally fixates on, and motion is moving around you, that leads to sickness. And so I said to that person, I said, you are just an exceptionally focused individual. You see something that no one else sees. And I wasn't planning on using that for the sermon tonight, but it just comes down to, can you take something and turn it around to where it sounds good? It sounds refreshing. Huh. I, I, I am an exceptional person. I hope so. I hope that you feel that way, because that's important. Can you minister grace to the hearers? So the ninth commandment, not just a matter of, well, so I won't be a bear false witness. I'm just never going to say anything, Pastor, because I don't want to have any guilt on my conscience about bearing false witness. That's not what we're talking about. Do you minister grace to the hearers? I think that's the fulfillment of the ninth commandment. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for the truth of your word. And I pray that we would find the wisdom that's present in this commandment. I pray that we would be able to see just the refreshing of a church that is given to ministering grace to hearers, to going around and making sure to pass encouragements in the desert of this wilderness. Oh Lord, how much our world seems to value or to reward those who are able to pass insults to others, those who are able to misrepresent individuals politically, or even just in everyday relationship and context of the everyday society, and how our society wants to extol these jokes and these ways of trying to tear down other people. I pray, Lord, that would not be a part of the way we operate. I pray that our method would be, how can I encourage? And that I would be able to communicate as Jesus would communicate. And Lord, I pray that that would be such a difference, that society and those relationships that we enjoy would be benefiting from that. In Jesus' name we pray.